What if one of the most liberating decisions you'll ever make doesn't come in your 30s or your 50s, but after you turn 70, when the world expects you to slow down, but you begin waking up instead, when you stop chasing calls that never come, stop accepting invitations out of guilt, and start asking yourself, not who should I visit, but who actually makes me feel alive. This isn't a story about loneliness. It's a story about awakening, about discovering that your time, your peace, and your energy are far too sacred to waste on people who don't see you, hear you, or truly value your presence. And the moment you realize that, you stop showing up for the performance and start showing up for yourself. 1. Emotional boundaries. Older adults become more selective about where they invest their emotional energy. Visits that drain, disrespect, or bring up old wounds are no longer worth the cost. Saying no becomes a way to protect mental and emotional health, not selfishness, but survival. It doesn't happen all at once, but slowly, gently, like autumn leaves drifting from the trees. You begin to say no to things you once said yes to without thinking. Family gatherings, weekend drop-ins, coffee meets, casual visits just to say hi, and before long, you notice that the calendar that once overflowed with social obligations has become still, quiet, and deeply comforting. And while others may see your absence as withdrawal, you know the truth is far more sacred. Because stepping back after 70 isn't always about bitterness. It isn't about loneliness or sadness or shutting down. No, it's often about something far more beautiful. Something no one teaches you but life gently reveals with time. The realization that not all connection is nourishing. That some visits cost more than they give. And that your peace is no longer negotiable. And for the first time in decades, you start living from the inside out instead of from the outside in. And maybe you felt it too, the moment you realize that being the dependable one, the family bridge, the always there neighbor or friend has started to weigh on you more than it lifts you. And maybe you've caught yourself thinking, I just don't feel like going anymore. Not because you don't care, but because you finally do about yourself. Your energy, your inner weather, your space, and today, we're going to explore the deeper wisdom behind this shift. 6 powerful reasons why so many people after 70 stop visiting others, and why that isn't selfish, antisocial, or sad, but instead a sign of psychological maturity, a quiet revolution of self-respect, a transition from obligation to intention. And we'll begin with perhaps the most misunderstood reason of all, emotional boundaries. Because somewhere along the way, you start to feel the emotional labor of a visit before you even put your shoes on. You already know who's going to vent about politics, who's going to dominate the conversation without asking how you're doing, who's going to drain you dry with endless drama. And it's not that you don't love these people. It's that you finally understand that love without balance becomes sacrifice. And you've done your years of sacrificing, haven't you? Decades of showing up even when you were tired, of staying silent to keep the peace, of smiling through tension and pretending small talk was enough. But now something inside you says no more. And this no isn't hard or cruel. It's soft, gentle, deeply rooted in wisdom. And you begin to notice the difference between being wanted and being expected, between a warm invitation and an emotional obligation. And when you leave a visit feeling heavier than when you arrived, your body remembers, your spirit remembers, and the older you get, the less willing you are to pay that price. And that's not weakness. It's clarity, it's growth, it's healing. And it might look like Paul, 82, who used to visit his brother every other Sunday out of routine, out of family duty. Even though every visit turned into a debate, a retelling of childhood resentments, a subtle war of who remembers things correctly. And one day Paul realized that he didn't need to keep going just because they shared blood. That peace was a more sacred connection than history. And so he stopped visiting, not with anger, but with grace, and slowly a weight lifted. And that's the kind of emotional boundary we never talk about, but desperately need. Because age doesn't make your emotions any less real. It just gives you permission to finally honor them. And yes, some people might not understand. They may call it distance, withdrawal, even coldness. But you'll know it's not rejection. Self-preservation, the quiet refusal to keep wading into conversations that twist your heart or relationships that deplete your soul. And here's the deeper truth. Just because you're old doesn't mean you owe anyone your presence. You owe yourself your peace. And after years, decades of putting others first, this is the chapter where you start putting yourself on the guest list of your own life. And if that means visiting fewer people, then so be it, because the ones who truly love you will understand, and the ones who don't were only ever there to take, not to tend. 2. Time revaluation. Time begins to feel more finite and sacred. People stop spending it on unfulfilling routines or emotionally neutral visits. They start valuing peace, solitude, or meaningful activities over obligation. There comes a moment, often quiet, usually unannounced, when you stop seeing time as something to fill and start seeing it as something to protect, not with fear, but with reverence. Because after 70, time doesn't feel infinite anymore. It feels like sunlight in the late afternoon. You still have light, but you know it's precious. And suddenly the math of your days changes, and you start asking different questions. Not what am I doing today, but is this worth doing? Not who should I visit, but who truly fills my spirit when I do. And this revaluation of time becomes one of the most powerful shifts in late life, because you realize you no longer owe your hours to everyone who asks for them, not out of bitterness, but out of a growing love for what remains: your mornings, your quiet rituals, your walks in the garden, your favorite book or cup of tea, or the simple silence of your own home. And where once you would have driven across town or spent an afternoon tolerating someone's monologue about things you stopped caring about years ago, now you pause, you weigh, you wonder, and more often than not, you choose stillness. Because it's not that you've stopped loving people, it's that you've started loving your time. And that's a profound and necessary form of love, because every visit now comes with an invisible price tag. Not of money, but of energy, of attention, of precious minutes you'll never get back. And when those minutes aren't mutually cherished, when they're filled with surface talk or repetition, or silence that feels like absence instead of presence, you begin to walk away, not with guilt, but with clarity. And someone who deeply understands this is Lorraine, 76, who for over 2 decades made a 3-hour drive every month to visit her cousin. Not because it was particularly meaningful anymore, but because she always had. Because routine became duty, and duty became tradition. But one morning, as she packed her bag and looked out the window at the lake behind her house, she felt something shift, a quiet no rising inside her chest, a longing not to go, not to explain, just stay. And so she canceled the trip, picked up her sketchpad, and spent the day drawing trees instead of making small talk. And by nightfall, she realized she had laughed more with herself that day than she had with her cousin in months. And she didn't feel lonely, she felt found. And that's what happens when you stop trading your time out of habit and start spending it like it matters, because it does. And this isn't about becoming rigid or antisocial, it's about becoming intentional. And the people who misunderstand that are often the same ones who never asked how you felt during all those visits anyway. Because your life, at this stage, is no longer about performing for others. It's about feeling at home in your own rhythm, in your own breath, in your own choices. And choosing solitude over surface connection isn't isolation, it's liberation. And you don't have to explain that to anyone, not anymore, because for the first time in decades, you're not just living, you're curating, you're choosing. You're editing your hours down to the people, places, and moments that replenish rather than drain. And it may not be popular, but it's honest, and maybe for the first time in your life, you don't mind being misunderstood because you finally understand yourself. 3. Emotional drain. Many visits feel more like performances than real connection. Seniors grow weary of shallow conversations, gossip, or unreciprocated energy. Emotional selectivity becomes a sign of maturity and authenticity. It's not the drama that gets you, it's the dullness, the disconnect, the feeling that you just gave someone an hour of your life and received nothing real in return. And as you age, you begin to feel that emptiness more clearly, more quickly, and more intolerably than ever before. And here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Some conversations are more exhausting than silence. Some visits leave you lonelier than staying home. And it's not because you've become bitter, it's because you've become honest. Because when you were younger, you had the energy to perform, to nod along, to entertain gossip or smile through topics you couldn't care less about. But now you feel it in your bones when something isn't genuine, when someone's presence is all noise and no connection. And emotional drain doesn't come from effort, it comes from imbalance, from giving too much and receiving too little, from having to shrink your joy just to make someone else comfortable. And suddenly, you're not willing to pay that cost anymore. Because emotional depletion at 70 feels different than it did at 40. It lingers longer. It hits harder, it takes more out of you. And you begin to guard your energy like it's a sacred currency, because it is. And no one tells you that the older you get, the more peace you need to recover from even minor emotional disruption. And that's not weakness, it's wisdom in motion. And you realize that not every call deserves a call back, not every invitation is a gift, and not every friendship needs to survive forever, especially if it's been on life support for years. And someone who lived that truth is Harold, 74, who used to visit extended family every weekend out of loyalty, even though he left each gathering feeling invisible, talked over, irrelevant, like his presence was more tradition than welcome. And one Saturday, as he sat quietly while the room buzzed with stories he wasn't part of and jokes he didn't laugh at, he asked himself, "Why am I still doing this?" And the answer for the first time was, "I don't need to be." So he stopped going, not with anger, not with a grand announcement, just with a calm exit. And in that space, he began to spend his weekends differently, gardening, walking, with a friend who actually listened, reading books that made him feel seen. And he didn't miss those visits. He missed who he used to pretend to be during them, and giving that version up. That was freedom, because there is no peace like the kind that comes from not having to act anymore, from letting go of the role you were cast in long ago, and simply existing in your own truth. And this shift isn't just personal, it's biological, backed by emotional selectivity theory, which shows that as people age, they become more focused on emotionally meaningful experiences, choosing quality over quantity, depth over duty. And that doesn't mean becoming cold, it means becoming clear. And clarity is a gift too few recognize as they get older. But for those who do, it changes everything. Because you finally understand that solitude is not a punishment, It's a sacred space you no longer fear. And in that space, you heal from years of emotional compromise, of being agreeable at your own expense. And maybe now, you've earned the right to stop nodding at nonsense, to stop enduring people who drain you, and to stop apologizing for craving peace over presence. 4. Physical energy limits. Even short outings can demand immense recovery time after 70. Older adults begin honoring their body's signals, valuing comfort and rest over effort and appearances. Choosing to stay home is often an act of self-respect, not avoidance. There's a truth that quietly creeps into your life after 70, one that no one really warns you about until it becomes undeniable. And that truth is this: everything takes more out of you than it used. 2. Not just physically, but energetically. And something as seemingly simple as visiting a friend. Sitting in a living room, smiling through small talk, getting in and out of the car, navigating stairs or long driveways. It doesn't feel like a routine anymore. It feels like a mission, and it's not weakness, it's just reality. Because your body is speaking louder now than it did in your 50s. And you've learned to listen, not with resentment, but with respect. Because after all the years your body has carried you, you finally start to see it not as a machine to push through exhaustion, but as a companion to protect. And maybe that means skipping the get-together that requires a 2-hour round trip, or saying no to sitting on metal chairs that ache your back for days afterward, or quietly stepping away from outings that ask more from your knees, your hips, your stamina than you have left to give that day. And you realize something deeper too. It's not just about the visit, it's about the recovery. Because what used to be a 2-hour coffee chat now costs you the rest of the afternoon, maybe even the evening, and while others don't see that cost. You feel it in your bones, literally, and it's easy for people to say, "Oh, we miss you." But they're not the ones managing the quiet calculus of your body's limits, of balancing presence with preservation, and no one understood this better than Barbara, 78, who used to attend weekly coffee dates with her longtime friend group, women she'd known for decades. But getting there required more than most people realized: a long walk across a sloped parking lot, navigating uneven sidewalks, sitting in a wobbly bench that made her hips throb by the time the second refill was poured. And when she got home, she wouldn't just feel tired, she'd feel spent, her body sore, her energy drained for hours, sometimes even into the next day and 1 week. She finally listened, not to the guilt, not to the pressure, but to her body. And she stayed home, brewed her own cup, sat by her favorite window, and watched the light move across her floor as birds sang outside. And that silence didn't feel empty, it felt healing. And when one of her friends later said, "We miss you," Barbara smiled gently and replied, "I miss me too, especially when I overdo it." And in that single sentence, she gave voice to what so many older adults feel but rarely say out loud: that visiting people isn't just about social energy, it's about physical endurance. And the older you get, the more sacred that energy becomes, and protecting it doesn't mean you've stopped caring, it means you've started listening. Listening to your knees when they say, "Not today." Listening to your spine when it asks for rest. Listening to the invisible clock in your body that now ticks louder than the one on the wall. And this is part of something deeper called embodied wisdom, the understanding that your body holds knowledge too. And when it whispers, "Enough," you don't argue anymore, because you've learned that ignoring those whispers turns them into shouts, into pain, into regret. And so you make new choices, not because you're fragile, but because you're aware. And there's no badge of honor for pushing through discomfort just to prove a point. especially when the people asking for your presence rarely acknowledge what it costs you to show up, and the ones who matter will understand, and the ones who don't. You're no longer bending yourself to make them comfortable, because the truth is, comfort isn't just a luxury at this age, it's a right and you've earned it. 5. Emotional economy. Emotional energy becomes like currency, not to be wasted on people who drain or disrespect. Seniors choose mutual, enriching relationships over history-based or toxic ones. Protecting peace becomes more important than pleasing others. Something powerful happens when you realize that your emotional energy is no longer infinite, that, just like your physical stamina, your inner world has its limits too, and where you once spread your feelings thin across people, events, and conversations that gave you little in return. Now you become intentional, protective, almost minimalist with your heart. And this shift isn't coldness, it's clarity, the dawning of what some call emotional economy. The art of spending your emotional energy as wisely as you would your savings, because you've lived long enough to know what happens when you pour too much into relationships that only leak, into people who drain you but never fill you, into conversations that leave you hollow, not seen, not known, and at a certain point, especially after 70, you stop asking, "How do I keep the peace?" and start asking, "Why am I always the one paying for it?" And the answer changes everything, because emotional economy means you stop calling people who never call back. You stop explaining yourself to those who never listened the first time. You stop visiting out of duty and start investing in people who truly bring you warmth, mutuality, and peace. And the shift is radical not in how it looks, but in how it feels like finally exhaling after years of emotional breath-holding. And someone who truly embodied this is Walter, 82, who used to call his adult son every Sunday like clockwork. Even though every call ended the same way, rushed conversation, sharp comments, barely a "how are you?" And one day, Walter listened not to his guilt, but to his gut. And he stopped calling, not out of anger, but out of self-respect, because it finally hit him. This wasn't love, it was maintenance. And he didn't want to maintain relationships that made him feel unseen anymore. And what happened next surprised him, not silence, but space. And in that space, he found something unexpected, a new friendship with a neighbor named Dean, who shared his love for crossword puzzles and jazz records. And over time, their conversations became the kind that fill you instead of empty you. And Walter realized that every emotional dollar he'd been spending on the wrong account was now yielding interest where it mattered. Because emotional economy isn't about having less heart, it's about using it better. It's about realizing that not everyone deserves your updates, your stories, your vulnerability, especially not the ones who weaponize it, dismiss it, or never bother to receive it with care. And when you start managing your emotional economy, people will notice, not all kindly. Some will say you've changed, some will say you've grown distant, but the truth is, you've grown up into a version of yourself that refuses to bleed just to keep someone else comfortable. And that's not selfish, it's sacred, because your emotional bandwidth is not for public use anymore. It's for the people who show up with intention, presence, and a willingness to meet you where you are, not where they wish you'd remain. And aging teaches you that peace is not found in having more people, it's in having fewer people with more depth. And yes, it may mean fewer calls, fewer invites, fewer appearances, but what you gain is immeasurable. Clarity, calm, and a deep, steady relationship with yourself. And when you stop investing in chaos, you discover how much beauty there is in silence, in slow mornings, in simple joys, in knowing that your emotional home is no longer for rent, it belongs to you. 6. Self-respect awakening. The need to be liked fades. The need to be true to oneself grows. Boundaries are formed not out of resentment, but out of dignity and clarity. Saying no to obligation-based relationships marks a shift toward authentic living. There is a moment, somewhere beyond the noise, the expectations, and the decades of being what everyone else needed you to be, when something inside you shifts, not loudly, not all at once, but in the quiet clarity of a morning, when you no longer feel like explaining yourself, when you no longer feel the pressure to go, to please, to apologize for saying no, and in that moment, a new kind of power rises, not rebellion, not resistance, but self-respect, the kind that's been quietly waiting its turn beneath layers of compliance, duty, politeness, and overextension. And this awakening, this realization, that you no longer owe the world your presence at the cost of your peace, isn't selfish. It's sacred, and once it arrives, it doesn't leave, because after 70, something magical happens. You stop shrinking to fit into rooms that don't deserve your presence, and you begin stepping back, not because you've given up, but because you've grown up, into the version of yourself who finally understands that you are not required to set yourself on fire just to keep others warm. And where you once blurred kindness with compliance, now you choose boundaries over burnout, silence over obligation, and dignity over default. And this shift doesn't make you bitter, it makes you free. Because after years of babysitting everyone's emotions, smoothing things over, saying yes when your soul screamed no, you finally come to this place where you say enough, and not with malice, but with grace, with strength, with an unshakable sense that your worth was never meant to be proven through sacrifice. And maybe no one captures this better than Marilyn, 76, who for decades was the family's go-to, babysitting grandkids, hosting holidays, lending money, organizing birthdays, always reliable, always available. But beneath that smile was a woman running on fumes, stretched thin by everyone's needs but her own. Until one day, after a particularly exhausting family gathering, she looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself, not because of the wrinkles, but because of the weariness in her eyes. And she made a decision that startled even her. She declined the next big family event, not with an excuse, not with guilt, but with honesty. And instead, she took a quiet weekend by the lake, alone, where the silence didn't feel lonely, it felt like coming home. And when her daughter called, surprised, saying, "But Mom, everyone's counting on you," Marilyn simply replied, "For once, I'm counting on me." And that sentence became her new compass, her new boundary, her new form of love for herself, because self-respect after 70 isn't a wall. It's a filter. It's what teaches you that you no longer have to attend every argument you're invited to, no longer have to justify why you'd rather stay home, no longer have to pretend that your presence must always be earned through service. And with this awakening comes a deeper stillness, a quiet where your worth no longer wavers with other people's responses, where your yes comes slower and your no comes softer but stronger. And yes, some people might fall away when you stop showing up on their terms, but let them, because what falls away when you stand up for yourself was never meant to be yours to carry anyway. And what remains? The people who adjust to your boundaries, who honor your rest, who show up not for what you can do, but for who you are. Those are your people now, and you'll find that your circle may shrink, but your peace expands, and that expansion, that's not an ending, it's a beginning. The beginning of the chapter where you finally stop living to be understood and start living to be whole. So maybe you've stopped visiting people like you used to. Maybe your calendar has more open spaces than circles these days. And maybe you've sat with that silence, wondering if something is wrong with you. Wondering if you've changed too much, pulled back too far, given up too early. But what if the truth is not that you've given up, but that you've finally let go? What if this season of fewer visits, fewer calls, fewer appearances is not a sign of fading, but a sign of focusing, not loneliness, but clarity? Because the older we get, the less interested we become in pretense, the less tolerance we have for forced smiles and shallow exchanges, the more allergic we grow to anything that costs us our peace. And in that soft, unapologetic shift, something beautiful happens. We begin to choose ourselves. Maybe for the first time, we begin to understand that not every relationship is meant to last forever. Not every invitation is meant to be accepted, and not every role we once played is meant to be repeated. Because aging isn't just about the body slowing down, it's about the soul waking up. And in that awakening, you start to honor your energy as sacred, your time as precious, your emotional well-being as non-negotiable, and that is not selfish, it's sovereignty. And if that means fewer road trips, fewer obligations, fewer dinners spent sitting across from people who don't ask how you really are, so be it. Because what you're really doing isn't disappearing, it's refining, curating your life like a gallery, removing what no longer inspires or uplifts, and filling the space with light, with quiet, with presence. And maybe others won't understand. Maybe they'll say you've changed, grown distant, become too selective, but let them. Because the people meant to walk with you in this season won't question your peace. They'll protect it too, and the ones who can't will quietly exit the way they entered. And you'll notice that their absence doesn't ache like you thought it might. Because you are no longer chasing what depletes you, you are now tending to what sustains you, and that is the difference between aging and evolving. One happens to you, the other you choose, and you, my friend, are choosing. You're not retreating, you're reclaiming. And the quieter your life becomes, the louder your soul begins to speak. And in that stillness, in those unvisited weekends and unanswered invitations, you'll hear it clearly. I am enough, as I am, where I am, with who I am becoming. And that truth is not just the end of something. It is the glorious beginning of everything you were meant to live without apology.